At Christmas dinner, my son-in-law looked straight at me and said, "You're sitting in my seat." I didn't argue. I just moved quietly. But the next morning, when he walked into his house and saw every piece of furniture gone, he realized whose seat it really was. Before we start the story, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new one. My name is Howard, and last Christmas changed everything I thought I knew about family. I was 68, retired from my job as a carpenter, and living alone in the small house I built with my own hands 40 years ago. My wife, Margaret, had passed away 3 winters ago, and since then holidays had felt like an empty room with all the lights turned off. My daughter Clara often said she wanted me to spend Christmas with her and her husband Nathan in their new suburban home. I agreed, even though I knew I'd probably just be there to fill a chair and keep old traditions alive for appearance's sake. That morning I polished my shoes, wrapped a bottle of wine in gold paper, and tucked the scarf Margaret knitted for me around my neck. I told myself to smile, to be grateful that my daughter still thought of me. When I reached their house, I noticed it was brighter, bigger, colder. There were shiny ornaments, music, and the smell of roasted ham. Clara hugged me quickly, already distracted by guests and kitchen noise. Nathan gave a half smile that didn't touch his eyes. He'd always been polite in a way that felt like a closed door. You could knock, but he'd never let you in. I walked into the dining room and stopped for a moment. The long oak table caught my eye. It was mine. I had built that table with Margaret one summer, sanding the wood until it shone. Years later, when Clara and Nathan bought their house, they needed furniture, and I'd lent them a lot. Table, chairs, even their sofa. The plan had been simple. Use them until they could afford new ones, then return them. But that conversation had vanished somewhere between time and convenience. Still, seeing that table sitting under the chandelier gave me a quiet sense of comfort. For a moment, I felt like a part of the room again. As the guests took their seats, I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the same place I'd sat every Christmas since Clara was born. My hand rested on the smooth edge of the table, and I felt a small spark of warmth. That warmth disappeared in a second when Nathan's voice cut through the chatter. "You're sitting in my seat," he said, not loud but sharp enough for everyone to hear. The laughter around the table went still. My daughter looked away, pretending to adjust the candles. I stared at him, unsure I'd heard right. Then I realized he meant it. I nodded, pushing my chair back quietly. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Old habits." I moved to an empty seat halfway down the table. The new chair wobbled a little beneath me. Nobody said anything. The noise returned, clinking forks, fake laughter, but I didn't hear it. I looked down at my plate, at the food I couldn't taste, and thought of how Margaret used to tease me for always sitting at the same spot. "You think you own the table?" she used to laugh. Maybe I did once. But that night, I felt like I didn't own anything, not even my place in my daughter's life. I stayed quiet through dinner, smiling when people looked my way, nodding when someone told a joke I didn't catch. I could hear Nathan talking about new business deals, a promotion, some expensive car he planned to buy. Clara looked tired but forced laughter anyway. When dessert came, she leaned close and whispered, "Don't take it personally, Dad. He just likes things a certain way." I wanted to tell her that respect wasn't about where a person sat. It was about what they'd built, what they'd given. But the words stuck in my throat. I just smiled again and said, "I know, sweetheart. It's fine." When the dinner ended, Nathan raised a toast, thanking everyone for being part of his home and his family. He didn't look in my direction once. The guests clapped, glasses clinked, and my daughter smiled, that tight smile that said everything was fine, even when it wasn't. As I put on my coat to leave, Nathan said, "Drive safe, old man," like he was talking to a neighbor he barely knew. I thanked them both, handed Clara her gift, and stepped into the cold night. Snow had started to fall, soft and steady. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the light from their windows flicker against the snow. The house looked warm from the outside. From the inside, I had felt frozen. I drove home slowly, every mile filled with a quiet ache. When I walked through my front door, the familiar creak in the floor greeted me. I set the wine bottle on the counter, untouched. My little tree blinked in the corner, uneven and half-decorated. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt something sharper. Not anger exactly, just a clear, cold thought that maybe it was time to remind people what they took for granted. I sat down at my old desk, opened the drawer, and took out a stack of papers I hadn't looked at in a long time. Receipts, titles, signed agreements. My eyes moved slowly over the pages until I found what I needed. The ownership documents, the ones Nathan never bothered to read when I'd helped them years ago. I smiled for the first time that night, not out of happiness, but out of certainty. I whispered to the empty room, "All right, Margaret, let's fix this." The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The sky was still gray, the kind of dull winter light that makes everything look quiet and unfinished. I made myself coffee and sat by the kitchen window, the papers spread out in front of me. Each document carried a story. Every loan, every signature, every favor I had done for Clara and Nathan over the years. There it all was, in black ink. I had paid for half their house when they couldn't get the mortgage approved. The furniture, the appliances, even the chandelier above their dining table. I had bought it all to help them start their life together. They had promised to pay me back when things got better. But when things get better, never came. I turned one of the pages and smiled bitterly. The ownership of the furniture was never transferred. I had the receipts, the invoices, even the delivery slips with my name. I had trusted them completely. Nathan was supposed to file the paperwork to move ownership into their name. He never did. At the time, I didn't think much of it. He was family. Family doesn't cheat family, I used to believe. But people change when comfort turns into pride. I leaned back in my chair, the sound of the old clock ticking beside me. Margaret's photo was still on the mantel, smiling in that way that used to calm me. "You always saw through people faster than I did," I murmured. If she had been there at that dinner, she would have said something sharp and kind at the same time, something that would have made Nathan laugh awkwardly and sit right back down. She had a way of making pride look foolish. I missed that. My hands rested on the papers. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't revenge, it was balance. Life had tilted too far in one direction, and I was done pretending not to see it. I folded the documents neatly and placed them in an envelope. Then I called the small moving company where I used to work part-time after retirement. The owner, Mike, still remembered me. "Howard, been a while, old friend," he said. "What can I do for you?" "I need a full removal job done tomorrow morning," I said calmly. "Address is my daughter's. Everything inside belongs to me." He paused for a second. "You sure about that?" "I've got proof of ownership for every item you'll move. I'll bring the paperwork myself." Mike didn't ask more questions. "All right, we'll be there at 10 sharp." After hanging up, I felt an odd calmness, like I had just finished solving a long, difficult math problem. For the first time in months, I wasn't tired. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I labeled the documents by room: living room, dining area, kitchen, master bedroom. Every line in those receipts was a piece of the life I had built for people who now acted as if I was a guest in it. By evening, the snow had stopped, and a pale moon hung over the quiet neighborhood. I sat in my armchair and stared at the phone, wondering if Clara would call. She didn't. Probably busy showing off her new house to friends, hosting another dinner, sitting at that table as if it were always theirs. I chuckled under my breath. "Enjoy it while you can," I said softly, "because tomorrow things go back to their rightful place." As the clock struck midnight, I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes. Sleep came easily, carried by a thought that felt both peaceful and sharp. The seat he took from me was about to vanish, along with everything else he thought he owned. The morning air was cold enough to sting my lungs when I stepped outside. I brushed the snow off my truck's windshield and watched my breath rise in small clouds. My old gloves squeaked against the steering wheel as I drove toward Clara's neighborhood, the same street I once helped Nathan pick out. Back then, he called it a family investment. Now, I looked at it as a stage where tonight's scene would quietly unfold. When I reached their driveway, I parked a few houses down. The lights were off, curtains drawn, their car gone. Good. They were both at work, like I hoped. I called Mike to make sure everything was ready. His crew had already been briefed. "You got the paperwork, Howard?" he asked. "All in the folder," I said, "and I'll be there when you start. Just make sure not a single scratch on anything. Those pieces mean more to me than money." He laughed lightly. "You got it. We'll handle everything careful as glass." By 10 o'clock, the moving truck pulled up in front of the house. I stood by as the men carried out one item after another. The dining table went first. The oak legs caught the sunlight for a moment, and I ran my fingers along the edge before it disappeared into the truck. Then went the chairs, the sofa, the cabinets, the lamps, even the small porcelain clock on the mantel. Margaret's favorite piece. She had chosen it the day we bought our first home. I remembered how she had said, "A home should always keep time for love." I smiled faintly at the thought. It took nearly 3 hours to empty the house. The rooms echoed when the men walked through them, their footsteps hollow against the floorboards. Every sound seemed to ask a question. Where did everyone's gratitude go? When the last box was loaded, I locked the door behind me, leaving only a folded note on the kitchen counter. It said, "Ownership transferred." Nothing else. No anger, no explanation, no name. I wanted the silence to do the talking. Mike climbed down from the truck, wiping his hands. "That's everything, Howard. You want us to take it straight to your place?" I nodded. "Yeah. Set it all in the garage for now. I'll sort it later." He hesitated before getting back in the truck. "They're going to be surprised." "That's the point," I said quietly. "Some people only notice what's missing when they lose comfort." As the truck rumbled down the street, I stayed behind for a minute. I stared at the house that once felt like an extension of my heart. Through the window, I could see the marks on the wall where their pictures had hung. Empty spaces. Fitting. On my way home, I stopped by the post office and mailed a small envelope addressed to Clara's house. Inside was a copy of one of the receipts for the furniture, signed and dated years ago. It wasn't a threat. It was proof. Something to remind her this wasn't revenge. Just a lesson in remembering where things came from. When I reached my house, the truck was already waiting. The men carried everything inside carefully, setting it where I asked. The table went right in the center of the living room. It looked smaller now, but somehow more alive. For a while, I just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching dust dance in the sunlight. That night, I sat at that same table and poured myself a cup of tea. The house felt full again, not because of furniture, but because I'd finally brought back the pieces of my life that had been quietly taken from me. As I sipped, the phone began to ring on the counter. I didn't even have to check the screen. I already knew who it was. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I smiled to myself and whispered, "You found the note, didn't you?" When the phone finally stopped ringing, silence filled the house again. I could almost hear the echo of my own heartbeat. I poured another cup of tea, the steam curling in front of me like thin smoke. For a moment, I felt guilty, just a flicker of it. Clara was my only child, and I never wanted to hurt her. But guilt didn't erase the years of being treated like a relic left in the corner of the room, useful only when someone needed something fixed or borrowed. By noon, I received the first call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Then came another. Finally, my phone buzzed with a message. It was short, written in a rush. "Dad, what happened? Everything is gone. Please call me." I read it twice before setting the phone down. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the garage where all the furniture was neatly stacked. The sunlight from the small window glinted off the polished wood of the dining table. For a second, I could almost see Margaret at the far end, laughing as she passed me the gravy boat. I sat down on one of the chairs, still wrapped in a bubble plastic, and exhaled slowly. The air smelled like sawdust and winter. Around evening, there was another knock on the door, persistent. I opened it to find Nathan standing on my porch, his face tight with frustration. Snowflakes clung to his coat, and his voice came out sharp. "You had no right to do this, old man." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. Behind his anger, I could see something else. Fear. Fear of losing control. "I had every right," I said calmly. "Everything you lost was never yours." He stepped closer. "You embarrassed us. We came home and the house was empty. The neighbors think we've been robbed." I smiled faintly. "Then tell them the truth. Tell them it wasn't a robbery. It was a return." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You think this makes you smart? You think Clara's going to forgive you for this stunt?" "This isn't about forgiveness," I said. "It's about memory. You forgot where all of it came from. I just reminded you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The snow fell between us, soft and slow. His eyes darted toward the truck parked in my driveway, the furniture visible through the garage window. "I'll get it back," he muttered. "You'll regret this." I leaned against the door frame, voice low and steady. "Maybe. But at least now you'll regret something for a reason." He turned sharply and walked back to his car, tires crunching over the snow. As his taillights faded, I closed the door and locked it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the strange rush of finally standing up for myself. Later that night, I sat by the fire, reading through Clara's messages. There were several more now, softer, almost pleading. "Dad, please, can we talk? Nathan's upset. We just need to understand. I'm sorry if we hurt you. Please answer me." I placed the phone beside Margaret's photo and whispered, "They'll understand soon enough." Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt something I hadn't felt since before Margaret passed. Peace mixed with purpose. The next part of my plan wasn't about taking things away anymore. It was about showing them what having nothing really felt like. By the next morning, my phone was full of unread messages. Clara had sent dozens through the night, each one more desperate than the last. Some were angry, others tearful. The last one was only 4 words. "Please talk to me." I didn't reply. Instead, I stepped outside to shovel the thin layer of snow from my driveway. The air was crisp, the sky pale, and the world felt strangely light. The garage door stood half open, and through it, I could see my furniture neatly arranged like it once was decades ago. The sight filled me with both pride and sorrow. I remembered how Margaret and I had chosen each piece, saving for months, measuring corners, arguing about colors. Every object had a story, a memory, a moment of laughter attached to it. And now, for the first time in years, those memories were back where they belonged. Around noon, a familiar car stopped at the end of my driveway. Clara stepped out, alone. She didn't look like the confident woman who once told me not to worry about her. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red from crying. She stood there for a few seconds before walking slowly toward me, her boots crunching against the snow. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling, "can we talk?" I nodded and led her inside. The warmth of the living room hit us, carrying the faint smell of polish and old wood. She looked around, recognizing every chair, every table, every memory. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the dining table standing proud in the center of the room. "You really took everything," she whispered. "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," I said calmly. "I only brought home what I paid for." She sat down on the couch, the same one she used to jump on as a child when Margaret chased her with a towel after bath time. Her voice broke. "You could have just told us how you felt. We didn't mean to hurt you." I sat across from her. When a man is told to move from his own place, words don't fix it anymore. That night I realized I was just a guest in your lives. Not family. A guest. Tears filled her eyes. Nathan shouldn't have said that. He didn't think. I leaned forward. That's the problem, Clara. None of you think before you treat someone as less than they deserve. She was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up, guilt and confusion mixing on her face. Nathan's furious. He says you planned this to humiliate us. I smiled faintly. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to remind you both what you were given. Sometimes people need to lose comfort to remember gratitude. She wiped her face and whispered, He's not the same man anymore, Dad. He's changed. Always talking about control and money. I didn't know how to stop it. Her words softened something inside me. The anger I'd held for days began to thin, replaced by a quiet ache. You don't have to fix him, I said gently. Just don't let him change who you are. Clara looked down at her hands. Can we get the furniture back at least? The house feels empty. Cold. Maybe, I said after a pause, but only when both of you remember what family actually means. She nodded slowly, understanding more than I expected. When she left, I watched from the window as her car disappeared down the road. I turned back toward the table, ran my hand over its surface, and whispered, That's one lesson down, Margaret. One more to go. That evening the phone rang again. This time it was Nathan. His tone was flat, but underneath it was a tremor he couldn't hide. You've made your point, he said sharply. Now bring back what's ours. What's yours? I repeated, keeping my voice even. You might want to check the papers before you call it that. I don't care about your old receipts, he snapped. You embarrassed me. You made us look like fools. Do you even know how that feels? I do, I said quietly. I felt it when you told me to move from my seat. There was silence for a moment. I could hear him breathing, heavy and angry. You're punishing Clara for something I said, he muttered. She's been crying for 2 days. I'm not punishing her, I said. I'm teaching her what you never could. That respect doesn't have a price tag. He scoffed. You think this makes you noble? You're just a bitter old man holding on to the past. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least the past I hold on to was built with my own hands. What are you holding on to, Nathan? Someone else's hard work? He cursed under his breath and hung up. The click echoed louder than it should have. I stood there for a long time, staring at the quiet phone, thinking about how easily pride turns into hate when it's cornered. The next morning I went into town. I stopped by the bank and asked to transfer ownership of a storage unit I'd rented years ago, the same place I had moved most of the extra furniture that didn't fit in my home. The clerk looked over the forms and said, Do you want to transfer it to anyone specific? I smiled. Yes, to me, only me. As I left the bank, the cold air bit my cheeks. I felt strangely lighter. Everything that once tied me to their world of half-gratitude was gone. But as I drove home, something tugged at me. The sound of Clara's voice from the day before, the way she'd said the house felt cold. She wasn't the enemy. She never had been. She was just living under a man who believed kindness was weakness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching snow fall under the streetlight. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a picture. Clara and Nathan sitting on the bare floor of their living room, wrapped in blankets, eating takeout from paper boxes. No caption, no words, just that image. I stared at it for a long time. The empty space behind them looked almost like my old workshop before I'd built anything in it. Quiet, plain, waiting for something real to fill it. I set the phone down slowly. Maybe they're starting to understand, I whispered. Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the soft ticking of the clock. The same clock Margaret had chosen years ago, keeping time for a house that finally felt like mine again. The next few days passed quietly. The phone stayed silent, and I didn't mind. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like loneliness. I spent my mornings cleaning the house, polishing the wood, setting things back where they belonged. The furniture fit perfectly again, like the walls had been waiting all this time for its return. Every creak of the floor, every smell of varnish and dust, reminded me that this was my work, my life, my effort that had built it all. By Thursday, a letter arrived in the mail with Clara's handwriting on the envelope. It was short and shaky, written on plain paper. Dad, I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry. I see now how we made you feel small, like a guest in your own family. Nathan doesn't understand, but I do. You gave us everything, and we treated it like it was owed to us. I miss you. Please come over for dinner this weekend. No guests, no show, just us. The note ended with her name, written like she used to sign her school drawings. I folded the paper and set it on the table beside Margaret's picture. She's learning, I said softly, but a part of me didn't trust Nathan's silence. Pride like his didn't die easily. That evening I went to the garage to check the lock on the storage shed, where I'd kept the rest of the furniture. I found fresh tire marks in the snow near the gate. The padlock looked untouched, but something about the scene made my stomach tighten. I went back inside and sat down with a notepad. Years of being a carpenter had made me methodical. I liked things measured and planned. I began writing a list, what I still owned, what I'd returned to my house, and what was in storage. Then I wrote another note, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a small box under the table drawer. If anything happened, I wanted Clara to know the truth, not the version Nathan would tell her. The following day, I drove to her house. The windows were still bare, and the living room looked hollow from outside. I didn't go in. I just sat in my truck across the street for a few minutes. Nathan's car was gone, but I could see Clara moving around inside, tidying the place, trying to make it look like a home again. There was something painful about that image. The same woman who once laughed while decorating a Christmas tree, now cleaning an empty house where every echo must have reminded her of loss. When she finally noticed my truck, she opened the door and waved. I waved back but didn't get out. I just mouthed, "Soon," and drove off. That night, as I sat in my chair by the fire, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Enjoy your victory while you can. No name, no number saved, but I didn't need one. I knew it was Nathan. I looked at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Still the same, I murmured, leaning back. Still doesn't know the difference between pride and strength. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the snow began again, heavy and slow, covering everything in white, like the world wanted to forget the mess beneath it. The snow didn't stop for 2 days. The whole neighborhood seemed to fall into silence, wrapped in a thick white blanket. I stayed inside, keeping the fire going and reading old letters Margaret had written me when we first married. They smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent she used to wear. Every word reminded me of what home used to feel like. Warm, steady, kind. By Sunday morning, the snow had eased, and I decided to take Clara up on her invitation. I dressed neatly, put on my coat, and packed a small wrapped box in my pocket. It wasn't a gift, just something I knew she'd need soon. The roads were slippery, but the air was clear, and the drive to her house was quiet. When I reached the street, I noticed Nathan's car parked in the driveway. I sighed but kept walking. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices from inside, not calm ones. Clara sounded shaken, and Nathan's tone was sharp. I waited for a moment, hand hovering near the doorbell before gently knocking. The argument stopped instantly. A few seconds later, Clara opened the door. Her eyes were red again, but this time from anger rather than sadness. Behind her, Nathan stood with crossed arms, jaw tight. "Dad," she said softly, "you came." "I said I would," I replied, stepping inside. The warmth of the house felt forced, like a room after a storm. The walls looked bare, the carpet rolled up in the corner, boxes stacked where the furniture had once been. Nathan spoke first. "You've made your point," Can we end this now? The place looks like a warehouse. I looked around slowly. It looks like a fresh start, I said. Maybe you'll finally learn what a home feels like when it's earned, not borrowed. Clara glanced at him nervously, but he didn't back down. You took advantage of us, he said. You waited for a chance to humiliate me in front of everyone. I shook my head. No, Nathan. You did that yourself when you asked an old man to move from the seat he built with his own hands. He clenched his jaw. You're twisting everything. Am I? I asked quietly. Then tell me. Whose name is on the property deed? He froze. His eyes flicked to Clara, who looked away. I continued, voice calm but sharp. The down payment came from me. I never signed away my half. You didn't even check before calling at your house. The color drained from his face. He started to speak, but stopped when I pulled a small envelope from my pocket, the same one I'd prepared earlier, and set it on the counter. What's that? He asked warily. Proof, I said. The rest of the paperwork. And before you say anything foolish, I've already spoken to my lawyer. Everything you've built on my share of this house belongs partly to me. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked trapped, like a man who finally realized the ground under him wasn't his to stand on. Clara stared at the envelope, then at me. Dad, what are you going to do? I softened my tone. Nothing cruel, sweetheart. I'm not here to destroy anything, but I am here to remind both of you that this family didn't start with him, and it won't end because of him. Nathan turned toward the door. You're unbelievable, he muttered. I'm not staying here to be insulted. As he walked past me, I said quietly, You'll want to check your bank account before you talk about ownership again. He paused, confusion flickering across his face, but didn't ask. He slammed the door behind him, his car tires spinning in the snow as he drove off. Clara sank into a chair, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, what did you mean about his account? I smiled faintly. Just a small transfer. Nothing illegal. Just correcting the balance on the house payments. Turns out, I've been covering his missed portions for months without even realizing it. Her eyes widened. You knew? I found out last week, I said. He wasn't paying the mortgage like he told you. He was using your money for his business debts. Clara covered her face with her hands. Oh, God. I reached across the table and placed the little box I'd brought in front of her. That's for you. Open it later when you're ready. It's something your mother would have wanted you to have. As I stood to leave, she grabbed my hand. Dad, thank you. I looked at her and smiled gently. No need for thanks. Just promise me one thing. Next Christmas, make sure no one tells another person they're sitting in the wrong seat. Then I walked out into the falling snow, the door closing softly behind me. When I got home, the fire had gone out, but the house still held warmth. I hung my coat, sat at the table, and let out a long breath I didn't know I was holding. The wind pressed softly against the windows, and for a moment, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I didn't regret it either. Some lessons needed more than words. They needed weight. I looked around the room. Everything I'd reclaimed stood just as it used to. The clock above the fireplace ticking steadily, the photo frames aligned, the oak table shining under the dim lamp. It all looked peaceful again. Still, something tugged at me. The image of Clara sitting alone in that empty house. The next morning, I found a message from her waiting on my phone. Dad, thank you for yesterday. Nathan packed some things and left. I don't know if he'll be back. I opened the box, like you said. The watch inside was Mom's, wasn't it? I'll take care of it. I promise. I smiled. Margaret's gold watch had been sitting in my drawer for years. She'd always said it should go to Clara when she grows into kindness. Maybe now she finally had. Later that afternoon, I went to the bank again to finalize the property split. The banker, a polite young man, handed me the papers to sign. Once this is filed, the title will reflect your full ownership, he said. I hesitated for a moment before signing. Actually, I said, make it joint ownership, half in my name, half in my daughter's, not her husband's. He nodded and adjusted the form. When I left the bank, the sky was pale blue and the streets glittered with leftover snow. I hadn't felt that light in years. That evening, I lit the fire again and made a simple dinner, soup, bread, and a cup of tea. I sat at the table, letting the warmth soak into my hands. Then I heard it, a soft knock at the door. When I opened it, Clara stood there holding the paper bag. "I brought dinner," she said shyly. "Thought maybe you could use some company." I stepped aside and she came in. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, and for a while, we just sat together, eating quietly. There was no tension, no awkward words, just the sound of firewood crackling and the clink of silverware. After a while, she looked up and said, "You were right, Dad. We forgot who helped to build our lives. I let pride blind me, too." I shook my head. "You just trusted the wrong person. We all do, sooner or later." She smiled sadly. "I don't know what's going to happen with Nathan." "Then don't rush it," I said softly. "Some people only learn when life removes their comfort." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I think he's learning that right now." When she left that night, she hugged me longer than she had in years. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said. And as the door closed behind her, I realized that this year, for the first time in a long while, Christmas finally meant something again. The next week rolled by slowly. The snow began to melt, and the roads turned clear again, but the chill stayed in the air. My days fell back into a rhythm. Coffee at dawn, tending to the garden fence that leaned after the storm, and quiet evenings by the fire. Life had settled, but underneath that peace, I could feel something unfinished, like a page left unturned. On Wednesday, Clara called. Her voice was calm, steady, almost different. "Dad," she said, "I filed for separation." For a moment, I didn't speak. The words hung between us, heavy but not unexpected. "Are you sure that's what you want?" I asked finally. "I am," she replied. "Nathan tried to talk his way out of everything. He said you twisted me against him. But when I showed him the documents, the truth, he just went quiet. He packed his things and said he'd stay with a friend. I guess his pride couldn't handle being wrong." There was no anger in her tone this time, only relief. "I think I'm finally seeing things clearly, Dad," she added. "You're stronger than you think," I told her. "Sometimes losing what you thought you needed helps you find what you really do." That night, after our call, I sat by the table and looked at Margaret's photo again. "You'd be proud of her," I whispered. "She's finally standing on her own 2 feet." The next morning, I woke to a knock on the door. When I opened it, a delivery man stood there holding a small parcel. "From a Mrs. Clara Benson," he said, smiling as he handed it to me. Inside the package was a folded letter and a set of new dining plates. Simple, white, with gold edges just like the ones Margaret used to love. The note read, "Dad, I can't replace the years I let you feel forgotten, but I can start building new ones with you. Next Sunday, I want to host Christmas dinner again, at my house this time, but only if you sit at the head of the table. No one else will ever take that seat again." My throat tightened as I read those lines. The plates gleamed softly in the light, a quiet promise of change. Sunday came sooner than I expected. When I arrived, the house looked warm again, small lights hanging in the window, the smell of roasted turkey drifting through the door. Clara greeted me with a hug, the kind that held forgiveness instead of guilt. The table was set beautifully, but what caught my eye most was the empty chair at the head, waiting for me. "Go on," she said, smiling through glassy eyes. "That's where you belong." I sat down slowly, running my hand along the wood. It felt the same as before, maybe even better. The clinking of plates, the quiet laughter, the glow from the candles. It all wrapped around me like the kind of warmth I thought I'd lost forever. For the first time since Margaret passed, I didn't feel like I was sitting in her shadow. I felt like I was right where she would have wanted me to be. As Clara poured the wine, she looked across the table and said softly, "Dad, thank you for everything." I smiled. You don't need to thank me, I said. You just needed to remember who built the seat. Dinner at Clara's house that evening felt like stepping into a memory that had finally healed. The lights were soft, the smell of roasted vegetables filled the air, and faint Christmas music played from a small speaker in the corner. It wasn't fancy. No guests, no big speeches, no noise, just the two of us sitting across from each other at the table I had once built with my own hands. For the first time in years, I saw peace on her face, instead of the tight smile she used to wear when pretending everything was fine. Feels different this time, I said, breaking a piece of bread. Clara nodded. It does. I think the house needed to be quiet for a while, to remember what family sounds like. She wasn't wrong. The silence was gentle, not empty. The air carried laughter, not tension. For a while, we just ate, talking about simple things, how the snow might last until February, how the neighbor's dog still barked every night, how she'd been fixing small things around the house on her own. She even laughed when I teased her about finally learning how to use a hammer. After dinner, she brought out dessert, an apple pie she'd baked herself. The crust was uneven, but the smell was perfect. I couldn't help smiling. Your mother used to make pie just like this, I said softly. Too much cinnamon, not enough patience. She always said you liked it that way, Clara replied, her voice low, eyes glistening. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us thinking about Margaret. Then Clara reached under the table and pulled out a small box wrapped in green paper. I wasn't sure when to give you this, she said. I unwrapped it slowly, revealing a framed photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was from when Clara was 6, sitting on my lap at that very same table, her face covered in cookie dough. Margaret had taken the picture, laughing behind the camera. At the bottom, Clara had written, in her small handwriting, "For Dad, who built our home with his hands and his heart." The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. I blinked quickly, trying to steady my breath. Where did you find this? I asked. It was in one of Mom's old boxes, she said. I thought you should have it again. I set the frame on the table and stared at it. The image seemed to breathe life back into the room, as if Margaret was still there, just beyond the candlelight. Thank you, I said quietly. Clara smiled, though her eyes were wet. You know, after everything that happened, I kept thinking about what you told me. That respect doesn't have a price tag. I used to think you were being too hard, but now I get it. Nathan never respected what he didn't build. I nodded. That's how some people live, Clara. They take comfort as a gift, but they never look at the hands that gave it. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I let him change me, Dad. I let him turn me into someone who forgot. I reached across the table and took her hand. You found your way back. That's what matters. We all lose ourselves once in a while. What's important is who we are when we come home. She squeezed my hand gently, and for the first time in years, the room felt full again, of warmth, of forgiveness, of something whole. The flicker of the candles reflected in the glass frame, making the photo shimmer as if Margaret herself was smiling at us. As the night went on, we cleaned the dishes together, laughing when she spilled water on the floor. I told her how proud I was, not just for standing up to Nathan, but for standing up for herself. She looked up and said, You were right about one more thing, Dad. What's that? I asked. You can take away furniture, money, even a house, but you can't take away the person who remembers what love built. Those words sat in my chest long after I drove home. The road was quiet, the moon reflecting on the melting snow. When I reached my house, I placed the photo frame on the mantel beside Margaret's picture. They looked right together, as if time had finally folded into peace. I poured myself a small glass of wine, raised it toward them, and whispered, Looks like we did it, sweetheart. She's all right now. Outside, the wind softened, and the house, my house, seemed to breathe with life again. The days that followed felt lighter, almost unreal. I'd grown used to silence carrying the weight of regret. But now it sounded different. Soft, like a song you could hum without knowing the words. I woke early each morning, brewed coffee, and watched the sunlight creep across the floorboards. It felt as if the house itself had forgiven me for the years I spent sitting in it, alone, half alive. One afternoon, I found myself sorting through an old chest in the attic. It held bits of my life that had gone quiet. Margaret's sewing kit, faded family photos, Clara's childhood drawings, even the first hammer I'd ever owned. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, flipping through the past piece by piece. There was a photo of us standing in front of the unfinished house. Me with sawdust in my hair, Margaret holding little Clara in her arms. We had built everything from scratch, even the laughter that filled the walls. As I looked at that photo, something inside me softened completely. The anger that once burned against Nathan had no place left to live. What I'd done wasn't revenge, it was restoration. I had simply brought things back to where they belonged, not just the furniture, but the dignity that came with it. Later that week, Clara stopped by again. She carried groceries and a small tin of coffee beans. "Thought I'd fill up your kitchen a little," she said, placing the bags on the counter. "You always cooked for everyone else. Now it's your turn to sit and be served." I chuckled. "You're sounding more like your mother every day." She smiled, the kind that carried both sadness and peace. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," she said. "How she never raised her voice, but somehow made everyone listen." "She believed that silence could teach louder than shouting," I said. "I think that's something we both forgot for a while." Clara nodded, pouring water into the kettle. "I was angry when you took everything, you know. For a few hours I hated you. Then when I sat on that bare floor, I realized how easy we'd made it for Nathan to forget your worth. You built the house, but he wanted to own it. You gave, and we all kept taking." Her words came slow and quiet, but they landed like truth should, without effort. "You've learned something that most people never do," I said. "You can rebuild money and furniture, but once respect breaks, it's harder to fix than wood." We sat by the window with our coffee, watching snow drip from the branches. She told me about her plans to go back to work, maybe even finish the degree she had put aside years ago. She spoke like a woman who had finally found her footing again. "I want to make something that's mine," she said. "No shortcuts. No depending on someone else's effort." I smiled. "That's how your mother lived. That's how I built this home. Every nail in this place carries the story of starting from nothing." She looked around the room, her eyes soft. "I see that now." Before she left, she handed me a folded paper. "It's a copy of the house deed," she said. "Half yours, half mine, just like you wanted. I made sure it's official. Nathan signed his share away before he left. He said he was done." I held the paper for a moment. It wasn't the document that mattered. It was the meaning behind it. She wasn't giving me something new. She was returning what was always meant to be, shared, not owned. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Next Christmas, I'll bring the pie again. Same table, same seat. Maybe that can be our new tradition." As I watched her car disappear down the road, I stood there a long time, the winter light stretching across the fields. Margaret's voice seemed to echo in my mind, gentle and amused. "You always said you'd teach her the value of hard work. Looks like she finally got her lesson." I smiled, whispering back to the empty air, "Yeah, she did. But she taught me something too." That night, I sat in my chair beside the fire, reading Clara's note again. The edges were already soft from how many times I'd unfolded it. I looked around the room, the golden light flickering against the furniture, the photographs, the clock still ticking steadily, and realized something simple but powerful. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It wasn't a symbol of what I'd built or what they'd forgotten. It was proof that love could be repaired, just like wood with cracks. Stronger once fixed, more beautiful once it had been broken and restored. As the fire crackled, I closed my eyes and whispered to the room, "You're home again, Margaret. We both are." Winter faded slowly that year. dragging its cold fingers across the rooftops before letting spring take over. The snow began to melt, leaving puddles that reflected a softer sky. Birds returned to the trees behind the house, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself opening the windows, again to let in the fresh air. Life seemed to move at a calm pace, quieter, gentler, no longer full of what-ifs and could-have-beens. One morning, I was sitting on the porch, sipping my coffee, when a letter arrived. This time not from Clara, but from Nathan. The handwriting was tight, the kind that comes from someone trying to sound composed while fighting pride. I hesitated before opening it. Howard, I won't pretend I didn't deserve what happened. Losing everything has a way of teaching a man who he really is. I was angry, mostly at myself, but I took it out on everyone else. You were right. I was living in a house I never earned. I've started over, got a small place on the other side of town, and found work again. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you for teaching me something I was too proud to learn on my own. Take care of Clara. She deserves better than I ever gave her. Nathan. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. I didn't feel hatred or triumph, just a quiet relief. Maybe he'd finally understood that real strength wasn't in control, but in humility. It was strange, but for the first time since that Christmas dinner, I wished him well. Later that day, Clara came over with a basket of fresh bread and a wide grin. "You're not going to believe it," she said, stepping inside. "I finally got approved for that teaching job at the local school." "I start next month," I laughed. "I can believe it. You've got your mother's patience and my stubbornness. That's a strong combination." She smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. Everything that happened, it pushed me to be better." We spent that afternoon in the garden, trimming branches and clearing the patch of earth where Margaret's flowers used to bloom. The ground was cold but ready, waiting for life to start again. Clara knelt beside me, planting the first seeds, marigolds, Margaret's favorite. "You remember how Mom used to say flowers grow better when you talk to them?" she asked, pressing the soil down gently. I nodded. "She said they listen if you speak with love." "Well," Clara said softly, "I think people are the same." Her words stayed with me long after she left. The house, once heavy with silence, now felt alive with echoes of laughter and the faint scent of soil and sunlight. Each day, Clara would stop by after work to share stories about her students. Funny things they said, drawings they made, how one little girl reminded her of herself at that age. The house began to fill again, not with furniture or gifts, but with life. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for Margaret to walk through the door, apron tied, humming under her breath. I knew she wouldn't, but somehow her presence had never really left. Every corner of the house still carried her touch. The curtains she sewed by hand, the small crack on the kitchen counter, from the day we tried to fix the sink ourselves. I used to think those flaws made the place imperfect. Now they made it real. One night, as I sat by the fire, Clara called again. "Dad, I was thinking," she said, "maybe we could have the family over next Christmas. Not just us, maybe some cousins, the neighbors, like the old days. Would that be okay?" "Of course," I said, smiling, "but only one rule." "What's that?" she laughed. "The head of the table stays mine." She laughed louder, a sound so full of warmth it filled the whole room, even through the phone. "Deal," she said. "No one will ever touch that chair again." After the call, I stayed by the fire, staring at the shadows that flickered on the wall. The house looked exactly as it had decades ago, yet it felt new, not because of what it held, but because of what it had survived. I realized something then. It wasn't the furniture or even the house that I'd reclaimed that night. It was the foundation of respect and love that had been quietly eroding over the years. And now, piece by piece, it was being built again, stronger than before. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the bare trees, whispering like an old friend. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the warmth of the fire wash over me. Margaret's voice came to me again, gentle as ever. "You've done enough, Howard. Let the next chapter be peaceful." I smiled, whispering back, "It already is." And for the first time in years, I believed it completely. Spring turned fully into summer before I realized how much had changed. The air grew warm, the trees bloomed bright green, and the sound of birds returned to fill the mornings. My days had become simple, the kind of simple I used to wish for when I was younger and too busy working to notice time passing. Now, every moment felt like a second chance. Clara visited often, sometimes after work, sometimes on her days off. She'd bring groceries, coffee, or flowers for the kitchen table. We'd talk about everything, her students, the neighbors, the garden we were slowly rebuilding together. She was lighter now, more at peace. It reminded me of how she'd been as a little girl, before responsibility and disappointment hardened her smile. One evening she came by carrying a folder. "Dad, I've been meaning to show you this," she said, settling at the table. Inside were papers, designs for a community workshop she wanted to start. "I want to teach kids how to build things, not just crafts, real work, shelves, stools, birdhouses, things that last, like you taught me." I stared at the sketches for a long moment. Each line was neat, practical, full of thought. I could see a small room with long tables, kids laughing, sawdust in the air, maybe even a few crooked nails hammered proudly by small hands. "Your mother would have loved this," I said. "You're building more than furniture there. You're building hearts that can make something from nothing." She smiled. "You'll help me, won't you? I'll need someone who knows his way around a hammer." I laughed. "If I can still lift one, I'm in." That night, after she left, I walked through the house again, slower this time. The wood floors glowed under the soft light. The furniture sat perfectly, and the air felt alive with something new. Not just peace, but purpose. For so long, I'd thought my best years were behind me, buried under loss and disappointment. But now I saw how wrong I'd been. The past hadn't ended. It had simply changed shape. A few weeks later, Clara's workshop opened in the town's community center. I helped her set up, sanding tables, hanging shelves, organizing tools. The morning of the first class, she handed me a small badge that said, "Volunteer Instructor." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. When the kids arrived, their energy filled the room like sunlight. They were all chatter and curiosity, asking questions faster than we could answer. I showed them how to hold a hammer properly, how to measure twice before cutting, how to fix a mistake without giving up. Every time I said something, I heard Margaret's voice in my head, guiding me the same way I was guiding them. After the class ended, Clara came up to me with a quiet smile. "They love you," she said. "You're good at this." "I just told them what my father told me," I replied. "A straight nail only matters if the hand behind it is steady." She laughed. "You always make everything sound wiser than it is." "Or maybe it's just old enough to sound true," I said. That evening, as we locked up the workshop, Clara turned to me and said, "You know, Dad, I think this," she gestured around the room, "is what Mom meant when she said a home isn't made of walls. It's made of what you give away." Her words stayed with me long after she drove off. I went home, poured a cup of tea, and sat by the window as dusk settled over the yard. Fireflies began to appear, blinking softly in the growing dark. I thought about everything that had happened since that Christmas dinner, the cold words, the empty house, the long nights when I questioned if I'd gone too far. All of it had led to this moment, quiet, honest, whole. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering without bitterness. Clara had found her strength again. Nathan had faced his truth, and me. I'd finally stopped living as a man waiting for something to end. The house creaked softly in the evening breeze like it was breathing with me. I raised my cup slightly toward Margaret's photo and whispered, "Looks like the family's standing tall again, love. Just like you wanted." The wind rustled the curtains gently, almost like an answer. For the first time in years, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. The years rolled on quietly after that summer. Seasons changed as they always do. Leaves turned gold, snow returned, and the garden Clara and I planted began to bloom in new colors each spring. Life had found its rhythm again, a soft hum instead of the restless silence it once was. The house that had stood as a symbol of betrayal now breathed peace. Every creak of the floor and tick of the clock sounded less like reminders of what I lost, and more like echoes of what I had regained. Clara's workshop grew faster than either of us expected. The first group of children turned into 2, then 3, and before long, the small classroom had become one of the busiest corners of the community center. Parents would drop by just to watch their kids proudly show off the crooked little shelves or birdhouses they made. The walls of the room were soon covered in drawings, thank you notes, and bits of sawdust that no one bothered to sweep away. To anyone else, it might have looked messy. To me, it looked alive. I spent most days helping her there. The kids started calling me Grandpa Howie, a name that stuck even among the teachers. It made me laugh, though sometimes it made my throat tighten too. There was something healing in being seen again, not as a burden, not as someone too old to matter, but as someone who still had something left to give. Each time I showed a child how to hold a chisel or square off a corner, it reminded me that value isn't measured in what you keep, but in what you pass on. Clara often told me that the workshop had changed her life. "I thought I was teaching them how to build things," she said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her forehead, "but I think they're the ones teaching me how to start again." I looked at her then, so full of life and peace, and I couldn't help but smile. "You just needed to remember what you were made of," I said. "Same wood, new grain." When winter came again, I found myself looking forward to Christmas for the first time in many years. Clara insisted we host the dinner at her place again. Only this time, she called it our house. The week before Christmas, we spent hours decorating. She played the same old carols Margaret used to hum, and we laughed when the lights tangled like they always did. On Christmas Eve, when the guests arrived, neighbors, old friends, and a few of the kids from her workshop, the house was warm and glowing. As everyone gathered around the dining table, Clara stood up and tapped her glass. "Before we eat," she said, "I want to thank someone, a man who reminded me that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And love is something you protect, not take for granted." She turned to me, eyes shining. "Dad, this chair is yours. It always will be." The room went quiet for a moment, and then applause filled it, soft but sincere. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. I just nodded, lifted my glass, and said, "Merry Christmas, everyone, and thank you for giving an old man his place back." Dinner was filled with laughter and warmth. People shared stories, passed plates around, and for the first time since Margaret's passing, the holiday didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt like something worth remembering. When I looked at Clara across the table, her smile was steady and proud. She had found herself again, not because I'd taken something from her, but because she had learned to rebuild from it. Later that night, after everyone had left, Clara and I sat by the fire, the house quiet again. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You know, Dad, I think you were right all along. Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped as losses." I smiled and patted her hand. "And sometimes," I said, "they turn out to be gifts." Outside, snow had started falling again, light and steady, covering the street in white. I thought of Margaret, how she used to say that every snowfall was a clean page from heaven, a chance to start over. Maybe that's what life had given us, a new page. As the fire dimmed and the last candle flickered, I looked around the room one more time. The familiar table, the photo of Margaret and me hanging above the mantel, the soft hum of peace filling the air. Everything that had once been broken had found its way back together, not the same as before, but stronger where the cracks had been. That night, before I went to bed, I stepped outside for a moment. The snow was falling thick now, the world silent except for the sound of it landing on the roof. I tilted my head back, let the flakes touch my face, and whispered into the cold, "Merry Christmas, Margaret. We did all right." And in that quiet night, I swear, I could almost hear her laugh, soft, distant, and warm, drifting through the wind like an answer I'd been waiting for. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us that kindness is never weakness, and that respect always finds its way home. Tell me in the comments, what was the most emotional moment for you in this story? Your thoughts help bring these stories to life. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and remember, every seat you lose can one day become the place where you finally find yourself again.